Today I'm going to show you how to do an occlusal composite filling. If you're a dental student or a young dentist, you might be wondering about the technique, or if you're another dentist, you might just want to see how somebody else does it. So I'm going to talk you through it now. The first thing I'm going to do here is prep a basic occlusal cavity. So as if you're removing some caries, we're not worrying about going into contact points or mesial and distal, just an occlusal cavity. So I've prepped a basic shape and you can see it on the screen. And then the first thing that I would do when you've removed the caries is try and bevel the enamel around the edge of your cavity prep, because a nice big surface of enamel, if you bevel it, you're going to have a wider spread surface of enamel, better for bonding to, and you've not got a hard edge. And generally with composite restorations, you don't want, I think, any hard angles and edges. You want a nice smooth shape. So we've got a nice smooth shape here. We'll show you what I've just dried the tooth off. So first thing for composite restoration, after what we've done so far, is etching the tooth. So I like to etch the enamel and the dentine. Some dentists will do selective etching where they just etch the enamel and don't etch the dentine. It depends on what bond system you're using, so just have a look at what bond you have in your practice. Personally, I just like the reliability of etching everything. I think it's the most foolproof method. I think it works well for me. So I etch the enamel for about 30 seconds and then the dentine for somewhere in the region 10 seconds, 15 seconds. If it's very sclerosed, hard dentine that looks just very heavily damaged over the years, I think you can get away with etching for a bit longer. And young, fresh dentine, you don't need to etch it for as long. And then I'm washing off all the etch here. Key thing, wash off the etch for ages. Good 10-15 seconds. I like using the air and water together, just blast it off, and then spend ages drying it. This is the key bit for the bond strength. You need to have good isolation, whether that's with cotton wool and aspirators or whether it's with rubber dam. You want to be blowing the 3-in-1 so you get a nice frosty appearance, and you make sure the tooth is just completely dry. Frosty appearance is for the enamel. You want a frosty enamel appearance. The next thing we're going to do is put the bond on the tooth. So spread the bond all around the enamel and on the dentine. I like to use Scotch Bond Universal, which is in this blue and orange bottle. There's loads of different types, loads of different good ones. I like using that, and I spread it onto the dentine and the enamel, and I take a good amount of time to do that. So there's one thing which people talk about where you agitate the surface and you really scrub the bond in, and there's various reasons why that is helpful for the bond. So take your time putting the bond on, and just look into what bond you're using, because each one is supposed to be used slightly differently. And then I spend a good amount of time drying or blowing the bond as well, so you get a very thin layer. You don't want a very thick layer of bond, in my opinion. And then I'll cure the bond, and then the next step is for me, I like to place flowable composite in the base of the cavity. So what I do is get a thin layer of flowable composite, place it around the cavity, and here I'm just using a probe to sort of spread it around and make sure it's going up the sides of the cavity wall, so it's covering all the dentine. Some people call this immediate dentine sealing, and I just really like the bond and the way that flowable composite bonds to dentine especially. So it covers the dentine completely, and then I cure that. And then I'll place my first layer of composite. So people talk about C-factor and shrinkage. What you don't want to do is just bung a load of composite into the whole cavity, because composite contracts and shrinks, and if you have a big occlusal cavity and you just fill it with composite, you're going to get too much C-factor, too much shrinkage on the cavity and on the composite. So what I like to do is build up 1 or 2 cusps at a time. So here what I've done is I'm building up the palatal cusps first. So I'll put some composite in and I'll spread it flat down the sort of palatal cusp angle, and I'm spreading it up towards the edge of the cusp and down into the base of the cavity. And I'll just sort of mold that a bit to match the shape of the bit of cusp that's still left on towards the surface of the tooth, and then I'll cure that. After I've cured that, the next thing I'm going to do is place the composite onto the buccal side, or the buccal side of the cavity. So similarly, get a decent amount of composite into the cavity, and I'm using a wards as my instrument, and I'm spreading it down into the cavity and against the cusp angle up against the buccal cusps. So that is restoring the shape that was there before, trying to copy the angle of the cusps of the teeth to recreate that all the way down, and then in the middle of the cavity to have the cusps joining to create some sort of fissure pattern. Now, when it comes to fissures, some dentists like to have really sort of deep, pronounced fissures that look super realistic, and I'll put bits of staining and stuff in as well. Personally, just a personal opinion, I don't like putting stain into composites. I don't think patients like it either. And I don't like really deep grooves because I think they just get plaque and stain built up in them. So I will try and copy the shape of the cusp of the tooth, but I won't try and create a really deep groove. I'll just try and have a fairly smooth finish to the restoration. So I'm just messing around here, trying to get a nice clean join. I think spending a bit of extra time sort of spreading it just very carefully and smoothly against the tooth so it has a nice clean finish, and then curing it helps with the polishing stage after. So then I'll cure that, and then after curing it, the next thing that I would do is start checking the bite with articulating paper and just adjusting little spots here and there, and hopefully doing it with this technique, hopefully you won't have to do loads of adjustment because you've followed the cusp shape. Hopefully you haven't overbuilt it too much, and little adjustments to get the bite right, and then you should be done. So that's a video about an occlusal composite restoration. If you liked it and you want to see more of our videos, let us know things that you might find interesting in the comments, and subscribe to our channel, and thank you very much for watching.